I think you'd be in the very small minority if you asked for a movie about Madam Web. And if you are, really? Out of all the characters to get a movie, and you wanted one about Madam Web? Well, I guess it doesn't matter now because the Madam Web movie did get made. And you know, nothing could have prepared me for it. I thought I hit rock bottom with cinema when I saw Ant-Man Quantumania. But then the Marvels came out, and that was the new rock bottom. Nothing could have been worse than that, right? To call this movie bad is an insult to movies that are actually bad. To say an AI wrote this movie would be an insult to AI. Madam Web is not just bad, it's a crime against cinema. Oh no, you say, this is just my opinion, right? That doesn't mean it's bad. How dare I say this is a fact? There has to be some redeeming qualities. Right, okay, I guess this could be a fun Valentine's Day movie if you really wanted to give your partner 2 hours of agonizing torture that ruins their love of movies. That way, you'll have them all to yourself. And I guess this movie is truly a groundbreaking experimental film. The way it experiments with almost every single aspect of storytelling.
A new kind of take on a superhero movie.
Now, I'm gonna do my hardest to relive the trauma that is Madam Web for you, dear viewer, because the movie is simultaneously so forgettable, but so horrible that it's now engraved in my memory. And that's the curse I have to live with now. So the movie follows EMT worker Cassidy Webb, who one day gets into a sudden accident saving another person and wakes up with time manipulation powers that allow her to see how people are going to die. She goes about her life just as normal until she runs into 3 high school girls on the metro, who she sees die by the same man in a vision. Desperate to save their lives, she escapes with them and runs away being chased by Vision Man, who also just so happens to be the man who killed her mother. And through the journey, they save the day and the 3 girls become friends and end up being adopted by Cassidy. Yeah. Great, right? You know, if the movie wasn't a cheap knockoff of Final Destination, then I think it could have had the potential to be kind of good. Who am I kidding? There's just so many things that went wrong. Firstly, one of the biggest flaws with this movie is the antagonist, Ezekiel. Aside from being a downright terribly written character, his acting is probably worse than the writing itself. He imposes no threat the audience can feel, lacks the much needed screen presence from a villain, and has horrible delivery on every line. When the actor tries to say something scary, you can't help but laugh at this poor goofball, and the way he hops around in a Spider-Man Halloween costume only makes him even sillier. And you also don't know anything about him, except how much of a creepy weirdo he is. The only scary thing the character did was walk barefoot in the New York City metro. You just know this script was so garbage when every other line Ezekiel delivers is poorly dubbed over in post-production. Most of his lines are dubbed off-screen, or sometimes just blatantly put over a previously recorded scene so it doesn't even match the character's lips or tone. Secondly, Cassidy Webb is probably the most boring protagonist in all of comic book movie history. Walmart Aubrey Plaza does an amazing job at showing no emotion in every scene. You can just tell how much Dakota Johnson wanted to be there and how much she loves the Spider-Man franchise.
I have always really loved Marvel movies.
I mean, what percent of Marvel movies have you seen?
4%.
4%.
15 minutes of one.
Can you name the 3 Spider-Man Tom Holland movies?
Spider-Man, here he comes.
Here he comes.
That's number 1.
Yep.
The Goblet of Spider-Man.
If you get tired of desperately trying to connect with Cassidy and understand what she's feeling by looking at her lifeless blue eyes, then the movie would just flat out tell you. Almost every single one of her lines are just full of exposition. And not just her, but literally every single line is just exposition.
He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
Knockoff Jessica Jones also loves to kidnap children, steal cars, and crash into little diners and face 0 consequences for her actions. But because the movie needs to happen, the police chasing her somehow no longer becomes a problem, and she's able to leave the country to take a side mission in Peru. Apparently, she needs to fix the relationship she had with her dead mother in order to unlock her true potential and become Spider-Man on a budget. She's barely even a superhero, and isn't necessarily happy when saving people's lives. She just sees it as an inconvenience. And if you wanted to watch a superhero movie, you don't even get that. You just get people hitting each other with cars instead of action sequences, less than 2 minutes of poorly made superhero costumes, and weird underlying sexual tension among every character.
I know that when you see Madam Web, you're gonna love it. In fact, I think you're gonna see it twice.
And her powers are so weird. Those scenes showing her powers were so disorienting and horrible to sit through. I genuinely got a headache watching all those lights flash on screen in a rapid succession. And the pacing was just all over the place. It goes on from one scene to the next with no breathing room, and yet it still feels like the movie would just never end. But don't worry, it's okay. Since there's no post-credit scene, you can just leave immediately to ask for a refund. And I don't know if it was just my theater, but the sound was also ear-piercing. Whoever did the audio for this movie needs to be hired for a rock band concert. Expect to walk out of the theater with tinnitus and minor epilepsy. It also doesn't help that this movie was shot on Snapchat by a millennial. There's so many weird camera zoom-ins at the most bizarre times. It's like dead Stanley Kubrick is forcing you to know that this is a dramatic moment, so he'll just zoom in on the character's face. And I'll reiterate something, because it's just that bad. Clearly nobody read the script, because they couldn't stay awake while reading it. If you just took one look at it, you'd see the story makes absolutely no sense, and it's just conflict for the sake of conflict. Like the three high school girls are flat one-dimensional caricatures of stereotypical movie tropes. The chemistry did not work, and they all somehow lack logic and survival instincts because they keep getting themselves in situations where they die. They're just so bad, and their stories are never resolved by the end. They're technically still kidnapped by Madam Web, and how do they eventually get their powers? Because that was the whole reason the villain attacked them. The movie doesn't even show that. But because the movie needs you to care about them, they somehow get adopted by Madam Web and become the X-Women. Yeah, Madam Web becomes blind and in a wheelchair by the end because fireworks got in her eye or something. By the way, who leaves a building full of explosives unguarded? Why did the police not care anymore that Cassidy steals so many cars, kidnaps children, and drives around in a destroyed taxi? Oh, and in case you forgot, it's a Spider-Man movie. It's not. Because the movie has Peter Parker phobia. They tease for the majority of a film that Cassidy's best friend, Ben Parker, wink wink, is having an unnamed nephew being born, wink wink. Wow guys, great. I wonder who you could be talking about. Just commit to the bits or don't do it at all. It's also implied that Madam Web is going to let Peter Parker's parents die in the end because she can see the future. So wow, great. Another reason to like the protagonist. Wait, remember how her last name is actually Webb and she has spider powers? Well, don't worry. We'll remind you because every other scene will have her face in front of a spider web. Oh, and in case you needed another reason not to like Pepsi and to drink Coca-Cola, just watch this movie. It's one big advertisement for Pepsi. Dakota Johnson holds a Pepsi can for a solid 10 minutes, with every single shot having the logo facing the camera, regardless of the previous angle. Great! So that's where they got the budget. Now I know that instead of actually using the money to do good for the world, or to spread a noble cause, Pepsi would rather fund a terrible movie being made for around $100 million. It's just an insult to injury. It's so bad, I get kind of mad that this type of movie can be made for this budget. It says something about not just the cast or crew, who honestly probably didn't want this outcome, but the studio behind it. The studio who is willing to abuse their reputation and brand to exploit their fan base with lazy content. Lazy content being made for about $100 million. And finally, the movie ends with a quirky line about the future. You may not be able to change the past, but you can change the future, because it hasn't happened yet. This line hit a little too close to home, because if I could change the past, I would have avoided watching Madam Web altogether.